Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Downtown DC Business Improvement District State of Downtown Forum. I'm Alex Orfinger. I'm the market president and publisher of the Washington Business Journal. It's really my pleasure to be here today and welcome you to this, what will be a really terrific conversation. Before we begin, please note that this session is being recorded and we'll be posting it later at DowntownDC.org. We'll also host a question and answer period at the end of the panel discussion. So to participate in that, please enter your questions into the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. As many of you know, the Downtown DC BID is a nonprofit organization founded in 1997, encompassing 138 city blocks, and is the DC region's main employment hub. The BID serves its members through providing capital improvements, resources, and research, as well as promotion of private-public partnerships. The coronavirus pandemic has had a deep impact on all economic sectors, contributing to the health of the downtown DC economy. As noted in the recently published Fall 2020 Economic Update, the downtown DC economy is currently performing at just 18% of its fall 2019 levels, 18%. Many contributing factors can be claimed, including the continued closure of the Capital One Arena, the closure of all theaters and entertainment venues, as well as the Walter Washington Convention Center. As we speak, just 4 of downtown DC's 11 museums are open. Downtown hotel occupancy is hovering around 12%, and only 10% of workers are reporting to their downtown offices. So today's forums includes representatives from some of downtown's major economic sectors who will provide their own perspectives on the state of their industries and the downtown economy. Now I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to provide a brief introduction. Meade, why don't you go first?
Thank you very much. My name is Meade Atkeson. I'm the general manager at W Washington, DC, and also happen to be the chairman of the Hotel Association of Washington, DC this year. Got the lucky draw there for being the chairman during the pandemic. And W is one of Marriott's 30 brands. So we're a Marriott hotel with lots of product in the city. And I've been working here for 6 years and thrilled to be a part of the panel.
Great, thank you. Ashok.
Hi, Ashok Bajaj. I'm the owner of Knightsbridge Restaurant Group, which has 10 restaurants before pandemic. Now I have 9. Among them are Rasika West End, Modena, Bombay Club, Annabelle, and few others.
Great. Well, thank you, Ashok. Some of our favorite restaurants. Chris Jennings.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Jennings. I'm the executive director of the Shakespeare Theater Company, a vibrant part of the downtown DC and the cultural arts scene. We've been in DC producing theater for over 30 years in our 2 theaters, Sidney Harmon Hall and the Michael R. Klein Theater in downtown DC. And I've been with the theater for 16 years. My first day of work was the day we broke ground on Sidney Harmon Hall. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and welcome. Timothy?
Thank you, Alex. I'm Timothy Lowery. I'm a director with the international global real estate firm HINES, and I serve as the general manager of the CityCenterDC project in downtown DC. If you're not familiar with CityCenterDC, it's on the location of the old convention center. It is a 3 million square foot mixed use development on a 10-acre site in the heart of downtown. It's comprised of office, residential rental, residential condominium, retail, and also hotel. So happy to be here today.
Great. Well, welcome, Timothy. Thank you. Chris, Mundy.
Sorry about that. I had the office portfolio, the U.S. office portfolio for Oxford Properties. It's about $7 billion in value in primarily Washington, New York, and Boston. In Washington, we have a number of properties that have been impacted by the activities and the pandemic, specifically 916th Street, which is right at the corner of Black Lives Matter Plaza, and also Gallery Place, which is adjacent to an arena that is inactive right now. And then lastly, we have the last remaining, what we believe is probably the best remaining office development site in the city at 900 New York, which is located in City Center.
Great. Well, welcome, Chris, and thank you. And last but not least, Susan Fisher-Strong.
Yes, good afternoon, and I'm so glad to be here with everyone. I'm the Alice West Director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts, and I have spent my career of 30 years at the museum, having become director just over 10 years ago. And our purpose, of course, is to champion women through the arts, and we are the only museum in the world solely dedicated to that proposition. Being in Washington, D.C. is really important because of its being the global center for power as well as the arts. And so I'm very happy to be here today representing the museum.
Great. Well, I want to welcome all of our panelists. We've got quite a power panel that will be interrogating in a few minutes. But first, I'm going to hand this over and introduce Jerry Whitacomb, the Director of Economic Development for Downtown DC, who's going to share with us an overview of their recent findings. Jerry, I turn it to you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all the panelists for participating today, and welcome to the audience. Hopefully I can get through this in about 5 minutes. The theme throughout this update is that the economic activity in downtown has improved since July, but it remains substantially below last year. You heard a few of those facts from Alex, but I'm going to go over a few of those quickly. Next slide, please. So here's the activity overview. As Alex mentioned, only 10% of the downtown office workers were in their offices in October. This is up from 5% in July. This is similar to what we see throughout the nation, but it's a substantial decline from last year. Our daytime population, which is made up of office workers, hotel guests, residents, and things like that, as well as visitors to the museums, is down 82%, but again, up from July. Metro rail ridership for September was only 8% of September last year, but this is up from 2% in April and 4% in June. Hotel revenue in the third quarter was just 9% of last year, which is up from 3% in the second quarter compared to last year. Next slide, please. When you get to the overall retail, we are at a record vacancy rate. A lot of this is due to national bankruptcies, whether it's Bed Bath & Beyond or Joseph A. Banks. But that's why we have a couple of restaurant closings. When you look at the regional restaurant sales for Margin Edge, at the bottom, you can see the downtown bid. It's down 66% from last year. And then you go to the cities down 52%. The rest of DC is down 46%, and the region is down 35%. And since the region includes the district down 52%, you can see that the suburbs are down something more like 25%. And so the further you get away from the office market and the hotel market, which are affected by the pandemic, and the further you get away from what I call the demonstration shadow that we've had since George Floyd's death, and more recently with the elections, the more normal activity there is in the city. Next slide. Now we'll go to the office market. Next slide, please. Here you can see on the left, we have a record vacancy rate, both in downtown DC and the rest of DC. And on the right, those bars show the amount of office space taken up by office tenants. It's been negative for the downtown and the green bars for the last 2 years, and it's turned negative for the rest of DC in 2020. Next slide, please. And because of the turmoil in sort of the leasing market, there's also turmoil in the sales market, and there have been no office building sales in all of DC in the third quarter. That's highly unusual. In downtown DC alone, we usually have 12 to 15 sales per year, or a couple, 4 or 5 per quarter, and we had none. So that's a very abnormal factor. Next slide, please. We go to hotels. Meade can talk about this more in detail, but next slide. You can see our occupancy rates are way down. Again, they have come up from the lows of the second quarter, but they are still way down. Next slide, please. Moving to culture and entertainment, and this is where Chris and Susan come in. Next slide, please. We're showing the the attendance, and you can see it's dropped off a cliff with all the closings of places where people gathered. The Capital One Arena is still closed, and the theaters and the performance venues like Warner Theater or Hamilton are still closed. Susan, her museum reopened at the beginning of August. The Smithsonian Portrait Gallery and Smithsonian American Art Museum are now open. They opened in September, and then the Planet Word just opened up in October, but still it's just at a fraction of the attendance, primarily due to timed attendance to keep people socially distanced. Next slide, please. Moving over to shopping, next slide. You can see the retail vacancy rate history to the left. It's at a record of 18%. It's increased dramatically. We weren't happy with it at the end of last year, but it's gotten dramatically worse during the pandemic. And Timothy can talk a little bit more about that. And then you see our shopping store net change. A lot of bars to the left at the bottom part, in 2018, 19, 20. We did have an opening in October, in the summer, with Lululemon taking over the old Uniqlo space on F Street. We have several stores under construction again at City Center and one planned at City Center, and Timothy can talk about those in a little more detail. Moving on to the next slide, please. Similar story in dining. Next slide, please. Ashok can talk to this. You'll see, generally in downtown, we were having 7 restaurants open and 5 closed up until 2018. Now there have been more closings. There are several restaurants under construction that hope to open in 2021, and a couple announced hoping to open in 2021. Next slide, please. So is there any good news? Next slide, please. Yes, there is some good news. We have a lot of planned development projects. Their time schedule is uncertain now, but we're hoping to get a better grasp of that as we get a better handle on the pandemic. And when they happen, they will be generating a substantial amount of new taxes for the District of Columbia. And then moving over to the upper right, we talked about the 12 new restaurants planning to open up when public health conditions and consumer demand are stable. Bottom left, we do have a near record office vacancy square footage for DC. It's about it's just off a little bit, 0.05% from the record high. And I apologize for the typo, but it should say record high in third quarter of 2019. And then in the apartment performance drop off, a lot of it is due to the delivery of a tremendous amount of new units, an 8% increase over the last 2 years, which in and of itself is a great thing for the district. Again, hopefully when we come out of this pandemic, those units will be filled up and providing economic activity in all parts of the district. Next slide, please. Why does this matter? Next slide, please. It matters because there are a lot of jobs downtown. We have over 180,000 jobs, 24% of the district's jobs. We're down 7,000 jobs since last year. We're up again since the second quarter, but we're growing at a slower rate than the suburbs. And so we want to make sure that our jobs, which are about 33% held by DC residents, continue to grow and bring people back onto the payroll. Next slide. And then there's a big tax impact, fiscal impact that we have. Here's a slide from our State of Downtown report from 2019. Our net fiscal impact is $869 million. That goes to fund a lot of district programs. It equals about 10% of the $8 billion local budget. And these last two slides are why we like to say it's downtown and the neighborhoods, not downtown or the neighborhoods. Thank you very much, Alex. Back to you.
Well, thanks, Sherry. That was, you certainly gave us a quick tour of that really important study that you guys released this week. So I really appreciate that. We've got a lot to explore, a lot to sort of peel back on. So I want to just sort of engage the panel quickly with a quick question. Just when you look back on these last 6 or 7 months, could you just give us in one sentence or so what your main leadership lesson is? What is it that you're going to take into 2021? Timothy, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, Alex, as everybody on the panel will attest to, it has been a huge struggle for all sectors and for all businesses. Personally, there's the personal side where you've got to be sequestered in your home and still trying to do business, which our firm typically doesn't do that. I know some companies are used to that way of working. We were not. So there was a learning curve there. So we had to move through that. But I think the one thing that I've learned in all of this is that, if you stay as positive as you possibly can, there's a path forward. Whether you're restructuring leases or whether you're talking to restaurants who don't see any way to survive and you're there to try to be a booster to what they're trying to accomplish and support them. I just have tried to maintain the most positive attitude possible and continue to encourage everybody that we're going to get through this.
Yes, good, thank you. Chris Jennings first.
So your question was a little different. I guess the difficult part for me was obviously.
Just in one sentence or so, Chris.
What now?
Just a couple of sentences, yep.
Oh, yeah. No, the difficult part was just that we have a number of employees, over 120 full-time employees who have made their livelihoods working at the theater, some over 20 and 30 years. And this period really forced us to not be able to have everybody on payroll, and it was heartbreaking. But I think the upside is, and what I will take with me is that we found a lot of innovation in this period, and you just have to innovate. So yeah, that's what I've learned.
Great, thank you. How about you, Susan?
So I think to my colleague, Chris, who has my sympathy, I'm glad at this point to be a museum rather than a performing arts organization, because in actuality with PPP and some help from the district, we were able to keep our employment at full scale. What we were able to do though, which was the lesson learned, is we moved digital with about 85% of our staff efforts almost immediately after March 16th. So we've learned that that's a great way for us to go, and we'll continue to do that digital work in the future and think of the visits to the museum as pilgrimage visits.
Thank you. And the other Chris Mundy.
I'll keep it short. I think staying connected with my team really hard when you take away the human connection piece. So I think the team's got a rhythm, but that was the challenge.
Yeah, how about you, Meade?
The hardest thing, which was the initial question, is definitely that of the 350 talent, which is what we call employees, only 75 are back to work. So I feel very responsible for those that are still out on furlough. And the leadership lesson is focus on the things you can control, and that becomes smaller and smaller every day.
Yeah. Good. Last Ashok.
Well, biggest challenge for me was when I had to go to all the 10 restaurants and tell the employees that we have to close. The good thing was the chefs got together, my executive chefs, and we met the team on a weekly basis, giving them care packages. So we stayed connected. And that was very satisfying, gratifying. And going forward, the challenge is how do we make our staff feel safe coming back to work and giving the guests, the diners, confidence to coming in the dining room to dine, that they feel safe.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a general question for each of you about when you expect your business activity to return to 2019 levels. So what percentage of 2019 levels would you forecast for 2021? I'm going to go in the opposite order this time. Ashok, could you answer that?
Well, it really depends on a lot of factors. Okay, it's just not one thing. Vaccine. When does the downtown office market comes back? Then is the office, what I'm hearing is a lot of leases are being restructured and they're taking less space. What happens? How many people will be allowed to work remotely? So dining depends on what is downtown, and it reflects on what Gary showed in his introduction. If you have 18% people coming back to work, my downtown restaurants are doing about 20-25%. Okay. So when would this come back? When the conventions come back, when the theaters opens, and when the arena stage opens. So in my case, in the dining wise, depends on all those factors. So I don't think Arena Stage is going to come back. Capital Arena is going to come back in next year with audience there, okay, with fans. I think it's going to be remote, or maybe they will allow some percentage of people to come back. So I'm anticipating 2021 to be, I'm not being pessimistic, but realistic, probably around 50 to 60% of 2019. And I think 2022, 2023 is when we're going to see the improvement there.
Okay. So Meade?
Alex, this is budget season, so we, in the last couple of months, have been putting together what we expect next year to look like. So it's exactly your question. And prior to Pfizer's announcement, I would say it was a real educated guess. But with that really exciting and out of left field announcement by Pfizer last week, in my opinion, it really solidified the idea that Q1 for hotels in DC will be largely like what it is now, with the exception of inauguration, will be in the 20% phase. Q3 in the spring will probably get up to close to 50%, maybe stay there in Q3 because leisure is the one part of the hotel market right now that is doing fairly well. And then there may be some hotels, mine for instance, that may have occupancies that look normal by Q4, by fall. It's a total guess. The other thing I would add is it's not the same across the country. The two worst hotel markets right now, year to date in the pandemic versus same time last year, are Washington, DC and Hawaii.
Thank you. Chris Mundy.
Gotcha. Boy, look, there's still a lack of clarity. I think we're all excited by the Pfizer potential. So the vaccine is the ultimate driver here. I'm hopeful. I think, for office workers, 5 to 10%. I don't see that picking up through the winter, given the increase in cases. And I would say a best case scenario is the middle of next year, if you get the vaccine that starts to be distributed. Again, there's a lot of work with that part of it. At what point do people feel comfortable enough to come back? But I look, one of the things that we've talked with Jerry's group, and we have a bunch of business leaders, is we're running at 5 to 10%. It's safe. We could go to 25 to 30%. I mean, there's plenty of parking, there's plenty of social distancing. And so, we are sort of setting some shorter term goals that hopefully we can get that, because that's going to feel good. And then I think more people that come feeds on itself. But if I had to guess percentages, I'd say we get up to 25 to 50 by the middle of next year. And then, it's another 6 to 12 months, depending on how fast the vaccine gets instituted.
Susan?
So
I'm going to get back to 2019.
mine's an attendance model. We're at 22% of attendance right now. When we first reopened on August 1st, we were at about 48%. But with the weather and changes in the COVID incidences, we see that number going down. We do hope that we would be by July, August, be somewhere around the 50% mark. But I am looking to connect with Planet Word to be able to offer some kind of advertising, perhaps through our National Capital Arts Coalition group, do some things together that will bring people back to downtown for culture, which hopefully will help the rest of the economic picture as well.
Great. Chris Jennings, a more complicated picture, I presume, with live theater?
Exactly. I mean, as I said at the beginning, we were the first to close. We were the public gathering spaces, and we're going to be the last to kind of fully get back up and running. But we're beginning to rebuild starting next month. So we're going to have public performances starting next month in a small pilot program. To get back to where we were, it's not going to be until 2022. It's going to be a slow rebuilding phase. There's going to have to be the distribution. There's going to have to be the public confidence in that vaccine before. And that's the tricky piece, is what is the time in which people really feel comfortable being back in public gathering spaces. So it's going to be tricky.
Yeah, and I presume the vaccine, if there's rapid distribution of vaccine, it'll change the equation quite quickly, perhaps. Yeah, great, thank you. Timothy, a little bit on the retail side, perhaps?
Well, you know, this year, like we've said, has been a real challenge. We had 0 foot traffic, you know, going into the spring because of COVID. We are now at about 30% of last year's foot traffic. So we're down 60, 70% year over year, which is definitely a challenge. Part of the sales in downtown rely on tourism. And we know from the report that tourism has been heavily impacted. You know, it's almost 0, to be honest with you, except for maybe some of the political comings and goings, as we're seeing with protests and such things. But, you know, we need cultural institutions to come back, as Susan and Chris were talking about. All those things play into a mixed use development and a retail center. And so we're projecting that, you know, somewhere, hopefully by the middle of next year, we hope to be back to about 100% of footfall year over year.
Wow, that's optimistic. So let's talk about another general question. It might not apply to all of you, but it's a little bit of a financial question. Did any of you, I know some of you received both federal and or DC assistance, financial assistance. If you did, could you just share roughly how much? And if you didn't, why didn't you? I'm going to start with you, Chris Jennings, this time.
Great. Yes, just as Susan pointed out, the PPP program, the CARES Act, was really a necessary lifeline that we needed. But unfortunately, that really covered only about 3 months for me. So we received about 1.8 million. As I said, I have about 124 employees full-time. And as you saw from Jerry's presentation, our attendance, our income went, you know, to virtually nothing. We depend on contributions, and the PPP was really the thing that allowed us to sustain our staff for a certain period at the full levels. We are continuing to survive on contributions, and we are hoping that maybe Congress will find a way to another federal program. But that was the main thing, and contributions. We are thankful that we have so many donors who are supporting us through.
Great. Susan, how about you?
And I think it's the same. For PPP, we received $780,000. It allowed us to bring our part-time staff back and also keep our full-time staff together. From DC, we received $5,700 also through a special program, which was also very helpful especially for part-time workers, because 50% of our workers are from DC, 50% plus. And so that was really great. Again, we have the contributions model. We do have admission. The one interesting thing is we're at about 55% when it comes to the museum admissions price, but people buy their ticket and they don't come, but they do become a new contributor, which is something pretty great.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share their either their federal assistant or DC assistance?
I was going to say, Alex, with hotels, about 98% are owned by somebody other than the brand that, you know, the name of the hotel. So in our case, for whatever reason, the owners decided not to take any of the federal assistance, but we got probably around $50,000 from the DC events grant, which was huge for us, really helpful. And we also got the recent $6,000 assistance towards work on outside restaurant patio things. So those are both great.
Anyone else want to offer up?
As a group among my restaurants, I believe we received around $3 million, but I didn't use all of it. I wasn't able to use all of it because I wasn't able to open all my restaurants. And but it did allow me to bring a lot of the stuff back. And with the uncertainty of on the accounting side, whether it becomes a grant or it becomes an income, so I didn't want to use all of it. But and then on the second from the DC, we did receive $6,000 a restaurant for buying the heaters and the tent and all that. Yeah, to do that, it was very helpful. Alex, I want to add something here. You know, I don't believe in handouts, but I got to tell you, PPP was very, very helpful.
Good. So if you had the ear of the federal administration and the DC government, what if, and you had the opportunity to ask them for some additional financial assistance, what sort of financial assistance would you turn to? Any specific ideas?
It is, yeah, but if you ask me, yeah, Alex, definitely the downtown restaurants are hit very, very hard. Okay, I mean, where the revenues are down about 80%. And as you've seen in the news, I had to close Oval Room, not because of, you know, streets are closed and nobody's coming downtown. So downtown is very hard. And I think you can't just generalize it. And I think Gary and I had this conversation in the last week or so. It depends on where your business is, okay? And whether it's downtown or it's in the suburbs or wherever it is, and really will depend. And you have to have certain criteria for that. You know, how much is it hit and how much help you need, okay? And it's not, you can't generalize right now that you own a restaurant or you own a retail business or whatever the other business you own, that everybody should be given the same amount. And I think different industries are hit different way. Downtown especially is hit very bad. So I think that would be mine.
And Meade, how about you, running the Hotel Association, running the W Hotel? Any specific recommendations?
My big recommendation, and it doesn't really, I'm not sure that I have a creative or innovative idea about support, other than the fact that we have a lot of employees that are out and someone needs to continue to support them when and if we can't. That's critical because there's so many hotels that aren't even open right now. But the thing that that strikes me is, and it came from my comment earlier about DC and Hawaii being the two worst markets. I completely support the city for taking proactive measures on the pandemic, for listening to public health experts, basing decisions on science. Thank you very much. Protecting us, the citizens, and making sure that the healthcare facilities don't get overrun. But somehow the messaging to would-be travelers from the outside has completely killed demand. And I'm not sure if it's the message or the tone or the order in which things are mentioned, but we just got a lot of people that think that they can't come to DC for whatever reason. And so I would ask that the city and those of us that are dependent on people coming from outside the city find a way to do it in a safe manner. There's ways to do that. We haven't had a single case in our hotel of transmission at the hotel. So for customer or guest, it doesn't mean it's not, there isn't some risk involved, but there's some reason why DC is at the bottom of the list in terms of hotel occupancy.
Okay. Anyone else on the panel have some suggestions? Chris?
Yeah, Alex, I could jump in here. Look, I think, out of, and Ashok said it earlier, you have to be pretty detailed, and there's a lot of different opportunities. And one in particular, and, out of the pandemic, I think there's an opportunity around the arena to really reshape that neighborhood. And there were some issues pre-pandemic that had already started to creep in. And so I do think, it's a public-private, and there have been some very preliminary conversations, but between the team and the arena owners and private landlords and the city, this is an opportunity to really look at that neighborhood going forward and make some, decisions about what everyone wants that to look like, because it's probably not in the highest and best form right now. So there is an opportunity there. And, my hope is that we'll get all those parties to the table and really look at this, because I think, there's an opportunity there.
Thanks, Chris. Chris Jennings, did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to reemphasize where Meade went, which is that, as I said, it's going to be a slow rebuild for us. It's going to be probably until 2022, which means that I'm not going to be able to produce when I am even at the full level. And those employees that I've furloughed, they I want to bring them back, but I can't bring them back if I don't have the work. And so I hope that there is continued unemployment support that carries these employees until we can reach the level, because it all rolls from the public confidence to our ability to produce, to our ability to employ. And we've got to take care of these people, because through no cause of their own are they sitting at home furloughed and trying to make ends meet and take care of their families.
Yes, and at some point they're going to have to find another job, and it's going to in your industry, it's going to be hard to go back and retrain a whole new cadre of people. It would be much simpler to start with what you have. So we've got a question from the audience, which was also my next question. What impact do you think the incoming administration could have on downtown? Would anybody care to tackle that? And we're assuming that's the Biden administration.
Okay, I tackle it from dining perspective. Okay, I mean, when President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden was there, they went out dining, burger places, pasta, fine dining, and I was the fortunate recipient of that administration in a lot of my restaurants. Having said that, yes, a lot of Trump people came to my restaurant too, so not discounting that. But I think President-elect Biden will go out to the other restaurants, which will energize the city, okay? And current president only goes to his own hotel restaurant, so he didn't go anywhere else. So I think that it will bring a lot of positive energy, and president tends to lead, especially in Washington, DC. Once they go out, public get energized. I still remember 1993, the first time when the President Clinton came to Bombay Club. And I have to say, I got calls from around the world, okay, calls, because, we did not have internet and so around the world, people wanted to know what he ate. So I think seriously, and, in every given time, for the next few months, people will come in, wanted to have a table, the same table the president ate. Okay, so president can have such a positive impact on dining, the social scenes, and so many other issues. And I think it will have a positive impact.
Great, well, thanks. Chris Mundy, did you want to jump in
Yeah,
on that?
look, I think from the office side, and again, this is a general, if you look back over time, when there is an administration change, generally there's an uptick in activity. There's other elements, our houses, the houses and the Senate and House aligned. But I think generally the expectation there's probably going to be an uptick, and you combine that with the fact that regardless of which candidate won, there's a need for stimulus, primarily probably through infrastructure, which leads back to DC. So that's a positive. I think looking forward, I think that's a positive certainly from the office demand side.
Right, thank you. Hey, Meade, we've got a question from the audience, and I'm going to follow it up with a specific question to you also, but could you say a little bit more about why people feel they can't come to DC?
Well, for instance, the most recent communication indicates that as long as you get a test and you're negative, you can come. Previously, the communication said that if you're on business, if you're coming for business, you don't have to focus on the 14-day quarantine. So I think some people just read that, oh, I got to get a test, I'm not coming. So I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on their trip purpose. But in general, and if I knew the exact answer, I would I would say there's something involved in the way that we are crafting our messaging to would-be travelers. Alex, if I can also I just wanted to say something interesting. One of the most exciting phone calls I got from my son was several years back when he was at Ashok's Rasika, saying, "I'm right across from President Obama. You'll never believe it." So we're looking forward downtown to the new administration using the restaurants and hotels that we've got.
Well, I mean, I'm going to come back to you with a question, but Ashok, what did President Clinton eat that night?
What did remember? He used to live he went to Oxford, so he was familiar with Indian food.
Okay.
So there were 4 of them, and First Lady, then Mrs. Clinton, and Associate Attorney General Webster and Susan, his wife. So they had mixture of a lot of different dishes. But Mrs. Clinton could eat spicy food. Okay, so yeah, but yeah.
Okay, that was a random question.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Yeah.
Yes, Meade, let me come back to you. You talked about Washington being Washington and Hawaii being the 2 worst performing markets for hotels, but there haven't been any permanent closures of hotels that we've reported on, as compared to where we've seen them up in New York. Can you give us any insight into where that might be, why that might be, or perhaps you'd like to break some news this afternoon?
Honestly, I don't think I can shed any insight on it. My thought would be that there are some labor situations in New York City that might make it more difficult for certain hotels to reopen, maybe ever. In DC, there are still several hotels closed, and whether they're closed temporarily or permanently, I wouldn't know.
Okay. Thank you. Chris, on Monday, I'm going to turn to you a little bit, and I just want to dig in a little bit on the office market. Have you seen any, you could give us just a flavor of, have you seen any significant moves to the suburbs or any tenants that have shown any increases and or decreases in their space requirements? There's been all sorts of rumors that people are rethinking the way they're thinking about space.
Yeah, so there's lots of rumors and lots of headlines. People have a lot of time to speculate, and I'd back it up and I'd say, on the good side, the office segment right now is stable. Tenants, by and large, are paying their rent, much different than the retail side. So you've got that. But then you have demand, and generally demand is frozen. And again, lack of clarity. I think if people knew we are going to have this vaccine and people will start planning when that happens, and I'm hopeful, based off the Pfizer news, we may all be in a position in the next 3 to 6 months where we can begin to shoot for whatever date that is. And so I think at that point, we can then start speculating, but there's a lot of ramifications, and it's easy to say work from home works because that's by and large our only choice right now. So when the day comes when people can actually come back, I think there's a lot more business owners, if you talk to them anecdotally, that want their people back. And that's not everyone, but so I do think there's a lot more to unpack as we go forward. And so I think there's been headline news, and I just think it's way too early to understand those answers. I think the reason why people are together, you cannot replace idea sharing. I think if you ask most people off the record, they want to be back together. Now, it may be a more flexible schedule. We may not be, everybody has to work from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. And I do think there's a lot of evolution there. The last question you did ask is we do have tenants. Frankly, I work from DC to Boston, and we do have a few tenants, and they are expanding because they want more space. And in the prior world, there was a densification. So we could see that going the other way. So again, hopefully that provides some context, but my view on the longer term impacts is there's a lot to unpack there, and people sometimes get ahead of themselves, and reporters like the headlines, So there you go.
Don't blame the reporters now.
Yeah, why not, right?
Timothy, let's talk a little bit about retail. While we're on this, office conversation, let's shift over to retail. There's been some speculation both in the Business Journal and elsewhere that there's been some, at least implicit conversations between landlords and tenants on just finding agreement on reduced rents or something to help manage through the pandemic. Can you give us a little bit of a flavor of what that might look like?
Well, absolutely. Early in this process, soon after we received notice that we were going to have to close down non-essential businesses, the phone started ringing. Because our tenants could not figure out, the formula, the calculus to how they were going to stay closed but yet pay rent and all of those challenges. So we adopted very early a kind of an advocacy program where we spent an inordinate amount of time speaking to every tenant, trying to understand what their particular situation was, what their particular challenges were. And then we worked with each one of them to try to craft a package that would allow them to stay open when they could reopen. Mm-hmm. And we are still working through that. There was what I call the first wave, which was in late March, early April. And now that we are seeing, unfortunately, the numbers rise again with positive cases and foot traffic continues to be impeded, we're now kind of seeing a second wave of requests begin to come in of people needing help. But we as a landlord have really tried everything we know to do, whether it was deferment, abatement, restructuring, whatever it would take to keep our existing tenants in business. That was our primary goal.
Okay, thank you. And is that this is not a fair question, but I'll ask it anyways. Is that your general sense of other retail landlords around downtown?
I participated in an article that was being done recently, and they asked that question of several different landlords, and I know they got a lot of different answers. Mm-hmm. I think in general, landlords are incentivized to work with their existing tenants because there's definitely downside to empty space and reletting the space and that downtime. So I think, and just loyalty, to be honest with you, a sense of loyalty to what people are going through. So I think most landlords have tried. I think a lot of the smaller landlords who, only have a small amount of tenants and paying their personal bills are dependent upon the revenue stream from their existing real estate assets. I think they struggled more than maybe the big, large real estate companies.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Timothy. Mm-hmm. Chris Jennings, let's turn to you in the Shakespeare Theater a little bit. Shakespeare, the Shakespeare Theater represents our arts community, our theater community, which is very vibrant, drove a lot of other economic development, particularly these last couple of years. So just give us a little bit of a flavor. You told us you're not going to get back to until 2022 when you see a full return. Do you think there are going to be permanent changes to the way that you operate, and what does that sort of look like for us?
Well, I think we will. Theater is, in essence, a communal experience and a live experience, and I don't think that will change. I think, as Susan talked about, we did find a lot of value in virtual, and we are continuing that, and we innovated in, and so, for example, our annual gala, which is normally a fundraising event, one night with 750 people. We turned it virtual, made it free. We had 13,000 households, so probably over 25,000 people watch it. And we had the same level of contributions, and we were able to garner all kinds of talent. Normally we'd have maybe one star, but we had Helen Mirren and Ray Fiennes and all of Judi Dench all in one evening because we were in a virtual environment. So there were those benefits, and we're going to learn how to take those with us. But I do think that we are going to be a part of the healing that is needed, and that is going to be a communal live experience. And as I said, we are going to I thought the mayor did a good job with really outlining a phased reopening, and we will have a phased reopening. We are starting next month. We are going to have a theater event in Sydney Harmon Hall for 40 people sitting socially distanced with masks. And we're going to teach people that it's comfortable, that they can come back, that it will be safe. You know, because people will all be wearing masks, distanced, and we have the ventilation. So I think it will be a safe environment, and it will get people used to that experience again, and we'll just have to rebuild.
So this virtual fundraiser you had, your annual fundraiser, what was the net and how did that compare to the prior year?
It was slightly down, but it was pretty close. So we did about 600,000, and we normally do around $1 million. But again, 600,000 from a virtual event is just amazing.
Yep.
And as I said, one of the most heartening things is the level in which people are stepping up and supporting the theater. They want us to survive. They want us to be here at the other end. And we're finding new supporters, and we're finding donors upgrading their support in ways that I've never seen. So that has really been one of the positive things in this.
Yeah, so Susan, I'm going to turn to you. I'm going to ask sort of the same kinds of questions about your fundraising. Did you run a specific COVID fundraising campaign? And can you tell us a little bit about how much you raised and how did that compare to last year?
Well, actually, we did not call it a COVID fundraising campaign, but like our colleagues, we really did we presented a case, and the case was really dire at the time that we were looking at our numbers in March. And so I think that what has helped us a great deal is we've seen this in waves, because as the stock market goes up, we do better with fundraising. As the stock market goes down, we do a little less well. But I also think that, and this is something that Chris and I and our National Capital Arts Group is working on, we're also looking to help support smaller organizations, whether it's GoGo in DC or DC Jazz Fest, organizations that need places to be, who need mentors, who could have some help in terms of their financial well-being, where we have different kinds of expertise, making sure that not just we survive, but that we can bring others, pull others up. That is really a key factor for us as among the major arts organizations. And so in a way, we're really millenarian in our thinking. We want to make sure that not only do we help all the businesses in our neighborhood, in our community, but we also help the arts community to perhaps even become better as a result of COVID, and certainly more cohesive.
Yeah, you know, when you said that, it reminds me a lot of about generally the small business community, that we'll be a much better community if we can save so many, these hundreds, if not thousands, of small businesses that are struggling, just like in the arts community. We as a community need to really focus on that, because that has been the thing that has made it such a great city and a great region to be living in. I want to turn a little bit to some questions from the audience. There's one question that came in: beyond the obvious direct implications of the plywood on downtown storefronts, how do you think that strategy has affected the long-term outlet for retail presence in downtown? Should there be more regulations, for instance? We chatted a little bit about this before the call started. Timothy, do you want to tackle that a little bit?
Well, as we were talking before the actual event started, putting up boarding has inherent issues. There's the cost for us, hundreds of thousands of dollars that has been spent putting boarding up, taking boarding down, and it's not a sustainable way of conducting business to be doing that consistently. The negative part of the boarding being up is that the optics of it are very negative. It's not inviting for people to come to our restaurants and eat right next to, and most of them are wanting to eat outside still, so they're sitting next to boarded up windows. For shopping, it's not an inviting thing either. So, I think that it's very problematic, but it has been a necessary evil because, as many of the people know who watched what happened in DC earlier this year, we sustained a lot of damage during the riots. 16 or so of our storefronts were damaged and some destroyed. So it's been very hard to navigate, Alex, when to put it up, when not to have it. And just as we were talking, we just took it down per a request from the city. And we just find out now there's another big protest this weekend. So that makes our retailers very uneasy. And I don't have all the answers other than we're just trying to be as responsive as possible to the information that we're given from the city or for the Metropolitan Police Department.
Ashok, you closed the Oval Room this past week. You announced that you're closing it. You closed Olivia. Does this boarding up the plywood issue, did that factor into anything, any of your discussions?
I closed Olivia because I did not see a path forward because I had 2 years left on the lease. And after talking to Roger Moskovich, who manages the Capitol Arena, and seeing the conventions for next year being canceled because Olivia had 3 private rooms. My 1/3 of the business was from private function. Another 1/3 of the business was from the bar. So when I looked at this and I said, there is no path forward for me to continue with Olivia. And that was the time to decide Olivia to close. Having said that, I have to say that Norman Jamal, who is the landlord, was very cooperative. But downtown is dead. Okay, so going back to Olivia, going back to Oval Room. Oval Room will reopen. Okay, but there was such a, the vandalism took place. I mean, the looters put the Oval Room on fire. Luckily, I was watched on CNN, and I rushed to the restaurant to put the fire off, and it's so much damage was done there, and then the street being closed and everything else has been done around it. I'm going to reopen Oval Room. Oval Room is going to open next year, March, April, depending on what happens with vaccine and what is the general dining comfort for the diners to go out and eat is.
Yeah.
But it will open in a new concept. And I thought, after 26 years, Oval Room has been successful, has a great history, and who's who have dined there, and a lot of memories in that restaurant. When Secretary Madeleine Albright was going to be announced at the White House for Secretary of State, she was reading her speech at the Oval Room. Secretary Condoleezza Rice, when the news was broke that from National Security Advisor, she's become the Secretary of State, knee was broken at the Oval Room. So a lot of memories and good memories. So it was a hard decision to change the name, but I think after so much negativity around that area, I think, and I was going to redo the place, and I said, I'm going to reconceptualize the place. And it's Oval Room is a special place. It has a special location in the city. People love it, and I'm going to create something new and fun.
Great, thank you, Ashok. Got a couple more questions from the audience that I want to make sure we get to. Tom Sherwood is asking, how competitive are Bethesda, Arlington, National Harbor, et cetera, doing compared to DC? Does one of you want to take a stab at that?
I mean, I can say from the dining perspective, neighborhoods are doing better, okay, for sure, because even in my own restaurant group, Sababa and Bindas in Cleveland Park does so much better than Bindas downtown.
Okay.
Annabelle is doing,
Go ahead.
Annabelle is doing better because it's in the neighborhood than Modena downtown. So I think neighborhood is doing better than the downtown restaurants.
How about Meade? Do you have any sense of how the hotels are doing?
Virginia is doing much better because they allow groups of 200, I believe, versus 50 here in DC. Now, recently, Montgomery County went backwards, and I think the most you can bring together there is 25 people. So we're definitely restricted by the size of group that we can have from a meeting or catering standpoint in DC. And to Ashok's point, the suburbs are doing better.
Yeah. Is there a moratorium? Another attendee was asking, is there a moratorium still on commercial evictions in DC? I don't know the answer to that. Chris or Timothy?
I don't believe we can evict anyone till next year.
I believe that is still in place. But from a practical standpoint, again, generally, nobody's trying to move things super quick, because again, the reason why you do that is you have a replacement. So from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure, and Timothy, you could speak to it. I'm not sure it's having a big impact when things open back up. If that's still in place, it might be more significant.
Timothy, you got anything?
We haven't evicted anyone, have no plans to evict anyone. We have had a few closures, but that's decisions that they made. But I do believe there's a moratorium for the city council that if you do have someone who's not paying rent, I don't believe you can even process the eviction until sometime next year.
So there's another question about the convention center generally, and whether we can get the mayor to allow expos to come back and bring business back to the city that way. Meade, I think that's more of a question to you. It might be to some others as well. Do you want to take the lead on that?
Yeah. So citywides, which the city gets 10 to 30 a year historically, is huge business for DC, for restaurants, hotels, for everyone. And it appears that in general, it really doesn't have anything to do with DC, but no one really is going to be comfortable doing those for a long time, maybe even a year from now. I'm not sure. Expos to me means more like local, car show, diamond show, things like that. And I believe it falls into the same category of, from a COVID standpoint, it's just not really a safe thing to do right now.
Yeah. So there's a question from the audience that I'm trying to read. Can you share some numbers, percentages of tenants that have just terminated their leases, particularly driven by the effects of the pandemic? Chris, I think you answered this partially before from your perspective.
Yeah, again, we haven't really seen that. I can't say we haven't seen it at all, but it's immaterial at this point. Again, lack of visibility. I think, it's another 6 months in my view before you start thinking about longer term impacts.
So here's another question that came in. Aside from financing, how can the city help you help yourselves? Is it communications, marketing, branding, convening industries to think through needs, or is there something else? Anyone want to try to tackle that? Chris, Jennings?
I'll just say it did help for me to be able to plan a season according to the phases. So we have 2 productions that work within phase 2. We have productions that are planned with phase 3. So having and understanding those guidelines and removing some of the variables really helped with kind of future planning. Obviously, more lead time to see where we will go with phase 3 and 4. Having that understanding will be extremely helpful, and at least understanding what's anticipated. So right now, phase 2's been extended to the end of December. It'd be great to know whether there's a belief that we'll get to phase 3 by January, or, and I know it will all change. We saw the numbers really change in the past month. So I recognize all that. So just good communication about those phases and how they're anticipated, I think will help in furthering that planning as well.
Anybody else want to take a stab at that question?
I just give a plug for Destination DC. They do a great job. Hotels rely on them for not only the citywide business, but also big marketing for the city. And whether it's leisure or small groups or whoever it is, they always put any money given to them to great use. So that's the plug I give on that.
Yeah, I'll just have one more comment. And again, there is some conversations going on, Jerry and the bid and Neil Albert and I think the city is involved in getting people to come back to work safely. And at 5 to 10%, there's a fair amount of room to come back that I think could help, again, bridge us to the future. So I think there's some stories out there that working with the city that we should be telling.
Great. Well, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and I've gone a little bit over our appointed hour. And it was a great honor to be moderating this panel with all of you. You've done such an extraordinary job navigating what has been, sort of extraordinary times. So I want to thank you on behalf of our community for doing that, but I also want to thank you on behalf of the bid for joining us today. I want to just remind all of our listeners that the recorded roundtable and the presentation will be posted to downtowndc.org within the next day or two. Again, thank you, our panelists, to a delightful, dynamic, and thoughtful conversation. And I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us. Do take care and have a great rest of your day.